Hello and welcome back to a new tutorial. In this video, we are going to be looking at how to set up 2D UI inside Unity on OpenXR, so in the VR environment. For those of you who are following the Introduction to VR Development series, this would be part 7. And for those of you who are just joining, you can still follow what is happening here as long as you have a XR rig set up. If you haven't set up an XR rig, you can go to part 2 of this series and learn how to set that up. So without wasting too much time, let's get started with setting up our first UI inside VR. So I'm going to right click in my scene and I'm going to create a canvas. So that is, you right click, UI and canvas. So let's call this VR canvas. And once we add the canvas here, you see that it adds an event system for us. So let's click on that and you will see a warning here. It says, or an error. It says you're using the standalone input module which uses the old input manager. So when we installed our packages, the project was set up to use the new input system. So we will just need to upgrade that here. So we click on this button, replace with input system UI module. And Unity will do the work for us, and that is part of the new input system module that we are using right now. So once we do that, we will go back to this. We'll go to the scene view and look at our canvas. So if you can see in our canvas settings on the inspector, the render mode here on the canvas is set to overlay. And that means, so let's say I add a panel here. Let me add a panel. And if I go to the game window, you'll see that the panel is overlaying on the screen. So what we need to do now is, we need to change this overlay to world space. So we have our settings here. In the render mode, we change it to world space. And what world space does is, it makes the canvas from being an overlay canvas to a world space canvas. So now you can see, if I go back to the scene view, it is, let me increase the camera speed here. You will see here that it is present in the 3D space. Now we just need to position this wherever we want it. So the first thing I'm going to do is, I'm going to reset the position. Let's make that 0. And in the scene view, let's see where that is exactly located. I will click on my XR origin and you'll see that the size of the canvas is insanely huge. And to make things easier, we will just scale down the canvas itself. So let's click on the VR canvas and scale that down to 0.001. And now you see that it becomes a more manageable size. I will drag that up and place it right next to our interactables that we had created here previously. Let's make that a little bigger. So let's make it 0.004. Okay. And now I'm just going to place that here. Let's make the panel a little bit more opaque. So I will click on the panel and I will increase the alpha here so that it becomes a little bit more opaque, and let me give it a nice, like maybe a light bluish color. Perfect. So once we have placed our canvas in the scene, we will start setting it up and making it more compatible with VR. So at the moment, the canvas that we have will not work in VR even if we add a few buttons on this, because it has no way of taking the input from our controllers or from the raycasters on our controllers. So the first thing we're going to do is, on our canvas, we will add a component called track device graphic raycaster. And this is the most important component that you will need to add. Otherwise, the trigger, the inputs from the controller will not work on the UI. And on the track device graphic raycaster, we have some options here. So we will select the ignore reverse graphics to be true. And that basically means that I can interact with it from one side. So if the button is visible from the back, if I click it from the back, it should not be interactable. And that is the reason why we do that. And that pretty much completes the setup for the canvas itself. Now we can start adding some basic UI elements. So in our panel here, let's add a image. So what we are actually doing now is we are creating a button. So let's call this a button. And to our button, let's give it a nice sprite. So I've already imported some PNGs here in the project, and if you want these, I can put them up on the drive and put the link in the description. So I have a button component, I have a close button, and I have a dialog box. And these are just PNGs that I've dragged and dropped into the project. The first thing I'm going to do is select all of them, and on the right here, we will convert them to sprites. Apply. Once we do that, we can start using them in our UI. Now let's take a look at the resolution of this button. And if you look here, it is 435 by 58. So we will resize our image to have the same resolution, 435 and 58. And we will provide this button sprite to the source image here. Let me drag that down. Under this, we will also add text. And we will add text mesh pro, because when you work with UI in Unity of any sort, text mesh pro is the standard. So it's always better to use text mesh pro over Unity's stock text. So we have importer here. It says import text mesh pro essentials. Let's do that. And this will import text mesh pro for us. And we have added the text mesh pro text here in our scene now. Let's do a little bit of basic alignment. So I will align this to the center, and we will stretch it. So it's already stretched. So I will just click Alt and click on this option here, and this will stretch the UI for us. So if you look now, it is perfectly stretched. Now we will align the text. So for that, I will scroll down on the text mesh pro component. I will center align vertically and horizontally, and let's just give it a text. Maybe we'll call this start game. Let's make it bold so it looks nicer. Maybe reduce the font size. And that should be enough. We will also add a slider. So let me right click on the panel here. Let me click on UI and select slider. And we have a basic slider here that has been created. I will scale this up to 2x. And the correct way to actually set up UI is a little bit more complex than this. It is ideally not recommended that you scale objects like this within the canvas, because we will need to stick to the resolutions that are available here. So the width and height. So we will have to stick to those parameters first and then only play with the scale. But now since we are just doing this for a demonstration, it's fine. So we have a slider here, and I'm going to make that bigger. And our panel, let's give it a nice dialog box look. So I have a PNG here called dialog box. And if you see, the resolution of this is 655 into 605. So I'll just set that here. And before we set that, you can see here on the panel, it is in the stretch mode. So we will just click that and make it center aligned. So once we do that, we can change the width and the height. because this is an alignment option. So if I click Alt and click this, it will go to stretch, and if I simply click on the center, it will center align, and I can adjust the width and the height. Let's make that 655 by 605, and that is the resolution of our dialog box here. And once we have done that, we will just assign this dialog box component to the panel. Yep, it's starting to look a little nice now. After we do that, we have to add our button component on our button here in the VR canvas. So we forgot to do that initially. So let's just add a button component to our button here. And now we can just hit play and take a look. So we are in the VR scene now. These are our old interactables, if you remember. And here we have our UI canvas, and you can see I can click the button with my trigger here, and I can also move the slider. So that is pretty much the basics of how to set up a canvas inside VR. Let's quickly add a few more elements here. So I'll create a few more buttons. So if you remember that close button that we had, so let me add that here. The close button has a resolution of 100 by 77. So we will set that to 100 by 77. Let's call that close button. Oops. And we will add a button component to our close button here. So it becomes interactable, and then we will just assign the sprite here. And this is our close button. Let's also add a checkbox or a toggle. We will scale this up again, and like I mentioned earlier, this is not the correct way to scale up UI elements. I will show you how to do that in a future video while working with UI. So the main idea is any UI element that you add here is going to be compatible with our canvas, and it's going to be compatible in VR. You can also have a drop down here. So let me just hit play. And here you can see I'm able to interact with all my UI here, the toggle, the drop down, the slider, and the start game button. Okay, so now we are going to take this a step further. As I move around the scene with my joystick, I want the canvas to look at me at all times. I want the canvas to be facing me at all times. So we will write a simple script which will make this possible. So let's create a folder called scripts. So this is the first time we are actually writing some code, by the way. So let's just call this face player. Okay, so let's get started writing some code now on our face player script. The first thing we are going to need is a public transform player camera. And this is the player camera transform that we are going to use. We are going to assign from the inspector. We will also need a vector 3, and this is going to be called look at position. We are going to be attaching the face player script to our canvas itself. So we are going to be computing the position that the canvas is supposed to look at. So in our update function, the first thing we are going to do is check if our player camera is not equal to null. And if it is not null, we compute the look at position. So the look at position is equal to a new vector 3. And here we are going to do for the x, y and z. The x we will get from the player camera's position dot x, and then the y we are going to get from the canvas itself. So we will do transform dot position dot y, and the z position again we will get from the player camera's position. So this is our look at position, and we will now make the canvas turn to look at the player. And how do we do that? Since this is already attached on the canvas, we will just do transform dot look at position. And there is one small step that we need to do under this, and that is the transform dot forward is equal to minus transform dot forward. And that is because since we are making the canvas look at the player, if I go to my scene and select the canvas, you will see that the Z position is pointing this way. So when we make it look at the camera, it's going to look from this direction, which means the canvas is going to be reversed. We don't want that. So we are just negating the transform dot forward so that it faces the correct way. Now we will add our script that we have just created, the face player script, to the VR canvas. And in the player camera field here, we will get the main camera on our XR origin and assign it to the player camera field. Let's hit play and take a look. Perfect. So now you're going to see that as I move, the canvas will look at me and I can interact with my UI elements. This is a very important feature that you will need to add, or you will be repeatedly adding in a lot of your VR development, especially when you work with user interfaces. Now we will do something one step further. We are going to make our VR canvas, we are going to combine what we learned with the 2D interactable and the 3D interactables and make sort of a tablet that you can grab and use. So let's get started with that. I will right click and create a cube. Okay, before we do this, let us first duplicate our canvas here, and I will place it on this side. Let me scale it down to about 0.15 maybe. So just big enough for me to be able to comfortably grab it. And so let's rename that VR canvas tablet. So now we are just going to create a cube in the scene. So we are going to make our 3D interactable. And you can see that here. I will make this cube a child of the canvas temporarily and make the position 0 so that it comes to the center. And I will bring the cube out. I will reduce the thickness of the cube to 0.05 or maybe even 0.02. It can be as thin as you want. And I will reposition the cube so that my canvas is visible here. So just barely that the canvas is visible. And I will click on the rect tool here and resize the cube. I can also switch to 2D mode here and just quickly resize the cube so that it somewhat fits inside the canvas. Switch back to 3D mode. I'm going to give this a material. We can just give it this black material here. And also on our VR canvas that we have just duplicated, don't forget to remove the face player component. We don't need that here. And now what we are going to do is we are going to set up our grab interactable on this cube. So let's call this tablet. And on our cube here, we will add our grab interactable, XR grab interactable component. And we will turn use dynamic attach on. And the last step is we make the tablet a child of this cube, so that when I move the cube around, the tablet moves with it. Let's rename that to XR tablet. Yeah. So now I'm going to hit play and we'll take a look. My tablet here, and I can grab it with my hands. And I can also interact with my UI elements at the same time. So now we will finish off this tutorial by changing some settings on our XR tablet that we have just created here. The first thing we're going to do is on our XR grab interactable, make it multiple select mode and multiple focus mode, so that I can grab it with both my hands. And I will also add the XR general grab transformer component on this and turn allow two-handed scaling on, so that I can scale the entire tablet up and down. You can see we have our canvas there looking at us, and here we have our tablet. So I can scale this up and down. I can hold it with one hand and interact with UI in the other hand. And this is also another super important interaction that you will need to know how to set up, because multiple UI types have multiple applications. So if your game calls for a tablet based UI, you can start by setting up something like this. And if you just want a static UI that faces the player when you move around, you can use this one.